Hello, my name is Megan Langhouse, and I will be the moderator for our event this evening. I would like to welcome you all to the third Executive Speaker Series lecture of the semester. Before I turn the event over to our host, I have two reminders for all of our viewers and our students. You have the option to ask a question throughout today's presentation by clicking the Ask a Question button directly below the video screen. I'll be posing a number of those questions to Nichole during the live Q&A toward the end of the event. If you're a student here for either a class assignment or class credit, we'll be gathering the student attendance during the Q&A portion of the event, so watch for a banner at the bottom of the screen to prompt you to do so. Now I'd like to introduce to you Beth Troy, Instructor of Entrepreneurship at the Farmer School of Business. Beth?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event. As Megan said, my name is Beth Troy. I am an instructor at the Farmer School of Business in the Department of Entrepreneurship. I teach creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurial thinking to freshman students in our first year integrated core program. I am also the founding director of our Advancing Women in Entrepreneurship initiative. And today's talk is many things, but one of the most important factors about today's talk is that we are joining a larger movement called Women Entrepreneurship Week that seeks to highlight female founders. So we're joining with over 240 universities in 32 countries to highlight women and work and women as starters and leaders in the business world. I am thrilled today to welcome Nichole Mustard. Nichole is a 1995 zoology graduate of Miami University. She took, upon graduation, or right after graduation, she took a one-way ticket out to LA to craft a life for herself, which eventually landed in her co-founding Credit Karma in 2007. Interesting time to co-found a financial services company, Nichole. And as of 2020, she is the Chief Revenue Officer of Credit Karma, which was just acquired by Intuit for $7.1 billion. So Nichole, I am not surprised that when I told my Advancing Women in Entrepreneurship crew, oh, I forgot in my long-winded introduction to represent, here's our logo. There we are, hidden under my jean jacket. Not because I'm not proud, it just happens to be where the jean jacket's fitting today. I was not surprised when I told my Advancing Women in Entrepreneurship crew that you were coming, and I asked them to do some research on you and what it is that they saw from your career path. What stood out to them was this idea of taking leaps. And I would say that my research syncs up. So tell me, when you're making these bold decisions to go from zoology to LA to financial services, is that how you would also describe your career path up to this point?
It's a great question. And first, let me tell you, you have one of the coolest jobs ever. I think if I could recreate and say, like, I get to teach freshmen entrepreneurship and innovation, like, that's amazing. So super exciting. Would I reflect and say that my life has been a journey of taking leaps? Absolutely not. I think that in hindsight, you can see the leaps that were taken. But for me, they seemed obvious moves, right? So when I graduated from Miami, so a little bit about me, I grew up in a really small town of 1,700, had 3 stoplights, 2 work, 1 blinks, formerly known as Pleasant's Glory up in Coldwater, Ohio. Miami was a big town when I got there. Like, it was, it had multi-story buildings. My dorm was probably more than my entire my entire high school. So it was like big time for me. But moving to LA was really, traveling my senior year of college and finding where I would be happy. And the power of the ocean was the thing that just made me feel calm. And it made me, I really embraced the power of it, the sound of it, the ability to have the indoor-outdoor life, the stability of the weather. And so moving there was just a path towards achieving happiness and finding a place that I felt I could find my best me. And so it wasn't a leap. And, this was back in the days when, you didn't have TSA and people could go down to the terminal with you. And, I vividly remember my mom walking me down, and she's crying the whole drive down to Dayton and crying through the whole terminal. And she says to me right before I get on the plane, she says, "When will you know that you failed?" And I said, "Mom, I love you with all my heart, but I'm not coming back." I'm going to go find my home and the place that makes me happy. And so it wasn't a leap. It was more of a journey towards things that I believe would give me more opportunities and more settlements. And that's, each of those leaps, whether it's, moving to LA, I moved to Boston for a period of time. I was employee number 10 at another startup there, moving back to LA. All of them either had reasons for my family or for myself around finding this stability and this calmness of where like I felt happy and comfortable. And so they weren't leaps. They were actually trips to where life would be better for me. And in hindsight, I do see that they were quite like when you call them out, they seem a little crazy. You're like, oh my gosh, you're so brave and bold. And I'm like, well, I think just staying where I was would have been so easy to do. And, the thing is I wouldn't have excelled and I probably would have not, clearly wouldn't have achieved what I've achieved with Credit Karma. But more importantly, I don't think I would have been happy. And for me, that's the thing that drives me. And, in hindsight, it looks like leaps, but for me, it's always just been a journey to do the things that resonate.
Okay. And so are you here to say that Lake Erie wasn't calling you in the same way the Pacific Ocean was? Is that what you're saying? You're breaking my Midwestern heart right now.
I mean, it does call me. I come home all the time. I make it to the Midwest and I love the Midwest. My wife and my kids, we come back and we jump in the dairy parlor and I throw them on 4-wheelers and I teach them how to drive 18-wheelers. And I love all of that.
Right.
But for me, it's not the mountains and it's not the fields. It's the roar of the ocean and that power. And if you think about LA to Boston to LA to San Fran, I'm just not willing to leave that water. I'm just not willing to leave it. That's been something that's just deeply resonated with my soul and it's spiritual for me and I will always chase it.
I love that when your kids come back, you're like, now you're going to have these experiences and you will learn to drive a 4-wheel because we can't do this in San Francisco, children. It's a little more complicated out there, right?
Yeah, my kids love that. They go collect eggs. I do. I throw them in the dairy parlor. I'm like, 6 o'clock, we're going to start.
Right.
It's awesome.
Chickens aren't waiting for your little West Coast schedule here, children. So if you would be willing to rewind a little bit to your time at Miami, I know just teaching students, semester in, semester out, it's one of those things where it's like you have a path to where it is that you're going, but sometimes you're wondering with your experiences Miami, how they all factor in. So looking back on your experiences here as a student in the zoology department, what do you see about those experiences and how they have played out in your decision-making process, even including your decision to leave the Midwest, to seek happiness and to, ultimately go into a startup?
Yeah. So, I think college, and I have a 16-year-old, so we're starting to think about colleges. I think it's so hard to be so young and to define who you want to be and what you want to do in life, right? And I think that what was important for me in hindsight, and I did not realize it at the time, was that Miami gave me a liberal education that allowed me to really learn how to problem solve and to problem solve in a way where I could use my imagination to create things that didn't exist before. And then my problem solving was to go actually figure out how to create the thing that I had imagined, right? And Zoe did that. I talk about a lot of business problems as just an example of the heart. I'm like, well, put the heart in the middle. And is it the muscle? Is it the hormones? Is it the oxygen? Is it the blood? And I'll just go and I'm like, okay, so is it the monetization? Is it the data? Is it the product? Is it the acquisition channel? Is it, it's the same concept of thinking about solving a business problem just like you would a medical problem or a zoo problem. And so the thinking that I took away from that liberal arts education has just persisted in, analogies through my business life forever, right? And I love that because I think that is incredibly powerful. I think the other thing for me around Miami was just meeting people from, far outside of small town Coldwater, right? And learning that the world was so big. Growing up in a small town, our vacations were inside Ohio. I didn't fly on my first plane until I was 20 years old. Now, pre-COVID, I'm flying every day and all over the world, right? But opening my eyes in the horizon of like what could be, and like really expanding my imagination and realizing that there are friends and there are ways to solve problems and there are networks that actually can be much larger than what I had seen and experienced. And I took that away. But the other thing that I really got through Miami was just a double, triple dose of Midwestern values.
Yeah.
And so if you think about what I do is I build relationships. And it's those relationships that, I leverage every day to encourage people to take a step of innovation with me, to ask the bureaus to provide us data that they've never provided to any other company, to ask the issuers to build your underwriting models in our technology. That's their secret sauce. They would never do that anywhere else, but it's the relationship and building trust and learning how to earn the ask before you make the ask. It's always been one of those things that I feel is very Midwestern in me. And in the karmic way of life is like, you give first. And, I've always said, like, when we build relationships, I want to do something good for someone. And then we're on a trusted ground to where I can ask them to dream with me and to take them to a place of what could be, because I've already proven to them that I'll deliver what I've asked. And in that dream, there's something I have to deliver, and it has to be worth it for them. And starting with that karmic circle of like giving them something is really powerful. And that's even how we design Credit Karma, right? So when we started, people would say, oh, I'm going to sign up and there's going to be 50 pages before I even see my credit score, if I even get to see it. And, no, not at all. Like, you sign up, step one, you're seeing your credit score for free, right? And you're starting that journey of financial progress. And I think that just is so true to the DNA of the founder team of like, we want to deliver on what we've promised to the consumer or to the partner or to our, employee base. And it just continues to resonate in everything we do. We believe if we give first, then we could have that space to dream. And I think that's incredibly powerful. People often ask for the dream without providing any upfront value. And I think that it makes it much harder.
So today I just led a class on ideation, which I defined for my students as imagination. And, I can always tell when they're kind of looking at me like, Professor Troy, like, I'm not a kindergartner anymore. Why are you bringing up imagination in a business school? Like, does it play a role? This isn't a creative writing course and I'm not an artist. So thank you. I didn't even have to slip you a 20 for you to just like term drop for me. So I appreciate that, Nichole. Could you please tell me how you see the correlation of imagination and innovation and how this can potentially lead to industry disruption, which is what Credit Karma has done?
Yeah, so I think that, so many businesses go out and they'll, I love market research. I love it. It really helps you understand what's the best way to build a journey or build an experience, but you can rarely use it to identify or solve an unknown problem. And so, like, as a person in finance, I'm very obsessed and I'm like, what do I do? How can I make everything that I do better? How can I either optimize it or design it differently or use it different or get more for it? And then I take that as like, my reward points, right? Like, how do I get more reward points? How do I, that in and of itself is a product that doesn't exist today, right? How are you, like, I dream or I imagine, like, imagine if instead of having 5 credit cards, I had 1 credit card, and in that 1 credit card, it would segment, should this be the Chase Freedom card? Should this be the Bank of America card? Should this be the Discover card? Because 1 card I get cash back for gas, the next card I get cash back for groceries, other card I get it for like CVS and pharmacies. But I only walk around with 1 card. But what if I could put all those cards in one place? Now, what if I took that, we talk about 5-star hotels versus 6-star hotels. So like, what if I took that imagination and I made it go from a 5-star hotel to a 6-star hotel? And I said, well, now what if when I'm shopping at Target, it could actually micro segment each of those transactions to different cards where it maximizes each of those rewards, right? now Chase and Discover and BofA would probably call me up and be like, hey, our system only works when we only do 2% on the 5%, 2% of transactions on the 5%. So like you have to figure out how it can work for all the constituents. But wouldn't that be amazing if like you just had one card, one phone that just did that for you and you didn't have to read and you didn't have to sign up for all these reward factors? But then you're like overwhelmed with the operational of it. Right? And I'm like, don't be overwhelmed. Just get started, right? Start with the smallest thing, right? Like I could take your six-star micro segment transaction and make it a 7-star, but like, let's get started on the 2-star or the 3-star. And that's what we talk about when we're imagining. It's like, how silly, how crazy could we dream? And then how much progress can we make today? Right. And as we make progress, what do we learn? And what additional resources do we get that then allow us to think about the puzzle differently? So an example of that imagination is when we first started the business, we didn't talk a lot about using credit scores as a way to personalize offers on Credit Karma. What we thought about was people that are getting their credit scores really are showing a sense of being in that credit state of mind, which generally means that they're looking for some type of financial product. So we thought, well, if we're in the credit scores, then these people are probably close to transacting on financial services. But then when we started to get more and more data, and our partners were pushing us to be better about the quality of what we would send them, we're like, oh yeah, we can do that because we actually have that data. But that wasn't obvious when we started. And then when we have that data, now you have it on 10 million, 20 million, 30 million people. And you have it not just at that point in time, but for years. Now you're starting to say, okay, well, now I can't just do hard cuts of data. I can actually machine learn what offer is best for you and what you're likely to get approved for. But again, that wasn't visible to us until we started to have all of that resources. So I think imagination and innovation are like steps of the stairs, and that you get started. And as you go, you have to continue to expand that imagination and redream that 4-star hotel, 5-star hotel as you're going. But it's so much fun. Like I could spend days in brainstorm mode on crazy ideas.
I can tell. I wish you were here in my office. I have so many Post-its all around. I cleaned it up for the Executive Speaker Series, but I think we would have quite a bit of fun. So if I could distill what you said, this idea of imagining big and imagining long to the nth degree, not worrying about figuring out how you're going to get there. So imagine big and then figure out what I can do to actually make that happen in a very distinct way today. And is that where your stair steps start to come in?
Yeah, so make progress towards it, but don't look for perfection. That's actually one of our values at Credit Karma. Because if you try to... Yeah, it's progress over perfection. So the 4 values, they actually, ironically, when we were all done, we realized that they spelled hope. But it's helpfulness, ownership, progress, and empathy. And they're really interesting because they're very valuable from the perspective of a partner, like a financial institution, and how we think about interacting with them, how we think about the consumer, and how we think about our own business outcomes. And so when you think about hope, for all 3 of those constituents, and that's where sort of the win-win-win model comes in, is that you have to go across all 3. But back to your question, innovation, imagination, yes. Don't get caught up in figuring out the operational plan for the long arc. You're never going to figure it out. Just start walking, right? It's like a trail hike. Just get going, put the boots on, start stamping out there, and you'll figure out your path as you see the terrain that you're coming upon. You're smart, you're bright, you're imaginable. Like, just get moving.
So to go back to ground zero of Credit Karma, rewind time to 2007, which I know as I say it, like chronologically, that seems like a long time ago, but I'm sure that doesn't seem that long ago to you. What was the problem that you saw in the market for consumers that really drove you to go all in on this?
Yeah, so I think there were 2 things for me. One is, I knew our other co-founder, one of the 2, and I just had an immense amount of respect for Ken Lin and had worked with him for 3 or 4 years previously, and just smart, kind, genuine, always the type of person you wanted to work with. And so in that world of being happy, I was like, this is really, really interesting. And I think doing things with people that you admire and respect is incredibly valuable. I think the second piece is we saw all of the online TV jingles around free credit scores. And many of us had experienced the 7-day free trials or the 1-day free trials, and then the charges that were very hard to get out of. And that felt wrong, but I didn't know what to do about that. And the reality was, as you started, I was in the financial services space previous to Credit Karma. And so as you started to talk to the leaders across the ecosystem, you realized pretty quickly that they didn't trust digital just yet. And they didn't feel that there was a way to determine quality consumers from risky consumers. And they felt that everyone was shopping for financial services between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m. and that it would never scale. And as a youngster with a lot of hope and optimism, I just didn't believe that. I thought it was early in the adoption of financial services, and that this channel was going to be where everyone transacted over time. And that, if you were to move there first and start to build relationships that added value, that you could be part of that long-term journey. And so we were like, hey, there's this problem. People are paying $29.95, and then it's taking them 3 to 6 months to figure out how to get out of it. And there's financial service companies that want more consumers, and branches are really expensive, and they don't know how to move into digital in a safe way. And we thought we would be able to bridge between those two universes and grow as more consumers went from, ATMs at that point in time and even in the branch to the digital environments.
So how familiar were you with startup culture when you went into this? And I know you had mentioned that you would work for a startup in Boston. Did you notice any differences with the West Coast scene?
Yeah, I was somewhat familiar. So I had worked for an Idea Labs company in Boston in the Back Bay. So it was not just not just a startup, but like Idea Labs is a portfolio of different startups, and they were based in the West Coast. So I knew a little bit of what I was getting in for, but because I knew one of the two other co-founders really well, like it wasn't, it was a very, very positive startup culture. We really valued the same things. We valued caring for consumers, doing right by people. We love healthy debates, and we think that better solutions come out of healthy debates. And we love diversity of viewpoint. So, all of us are very different. Ken grew up in Las Vegas. Ryan grew up in Pennsylvania. I was in Ohio. We all kind of have different backgrounds and different degree types and different, socioeconomic positions growing up. And so we brought such a rich and robust set of differences to the conversation that we all were able to learn from one another. And I think it helped us actually build products and build experiences that reached so many Americans and such a wide set of consumers, versus it just being for the rich or, for the middle class or for what have you. For us, we never segmented our users. We just said we're for everyone, and everyone can get value out of understanding their credit.
So for my students or for any of the students watching who are interested in going into startups, do you feel that there is a key role that students from a Midwestern university, from a small town, with a liberal arts education, is there a distinct role that they can play within this culture? Because sometimes the stories that you hear are daunting.
Yeah. I mean, I think startups are, like, there's pros and cons. I don't know that I would have been ready for a startup right out of college, right? I would have been ready to start my own thing up. But I think that, like, how to participate with others in that give and take is something that somewhat you've kind of learned and grown into a little bit. Now, at the same time, there are groups that form in college, right? And you see this all the time. They're kind of like bands, right? They form in college and they get that same thing of where they're coming out together and they're growing through that journey together, and actually forming their own businesses. So I think the biggest thing is to be part of a startup, you either have to have the idea or to be able to source your other couple co-founders that are going to go in this with you. And so if I think about how I got there, I knew Ken because we worked together when I was at a company called Compete and he was at eLoan, right? But otherwise, I don't know how I would have gotten into the startup culture or world without having been in that, relationship. So again, I think they should go for it. It is so risky, right? It is so risky.
A disclaimer that not everyone who does a startup will ultimately be acquired 13 years later for $7.1 billion. Like, that's not the end game.
People have whispered that in my ear that, the first company that I was with, Compete, was also acquired. So I'm like, one is good. One is lucky. Two is good.
Right. Lucky three, Nichole.
Yeah. Well, I've got plenty of time for one more.
You totally do. So, you were talking about this role of problem solving and, how your education sets you up just to think as a problem solver and to imagine. And I can see from what little I remember of 10th grade biology, the ability to break an organism down. In that case, it was a worm on the table. I still see it clearly, breaking it down to its pieces parts. And you start to see how, yes, small parts do end up adding up to a whole, a vibrant whole, right? And this aesthetic of what you had said, building relationships and earning the ask before you make the ask and coming at it with helpful. So one of the key roles that you have played at Credit Karma is this win-win-win business model. So why, first of all, is it win-win-win? And why was this something that you were passionate about being the architect of and what you do at Credit Karma?
Yeah, so for the people in the room that understand digital advertising, the funny thing is when I got to Credit Karma, I actually had to learn what a CPA and a CPM were. And so a CPA is the way that you charge for your cost per acquisition, and a CPM is the way that you charge for a cost per 1,000 impressions. And so, chief revenue officer, I had no clue how we even made money or what the different structures were. So that's, start where you are, right? But the thing when we looked across the industry, it felt so off. There were very large companies where you would have to fill out a form, and each form you would fill out one field, enter next page, next field, enter next page. And I'm like, this is crazy. They should just put it on one page. The consumer knows what to expect. They go through it and get their answer. It's very efficient. These page loads, back in their, the 2007, 2010, they're so slow. What's going on? And then I realized these publishers or companies like Credit Karma are charging you for all the banner ads on the side, right? And they were charging in a model where the way that they designed their experience was 100% for their business outcome of revenue from the banner ads. And I'm like, well, if I'm a lender, that's horrible, right? Because I now essentially have gotten the people that are willing to go through so much friction, AKA need money so bad that they were willing to deal with this experience, right? And that's probably self-fulfilling its own bias. But also, if I'm a consumer, that's a horrible experience, right? And I'm like, we need to build things in a way where instead of starting at the top of the triangle with what's good for our company, we start with what's good for the consumer. And we always call it the little 1A. It's right below it, right beside it, what's great for the partner. And if we build and design things in a way that's good for the consumer and good for the partner, I have to believe that it's going to lead to a great business outcome for Credit Karma. But it was very much taking the paradigm of how businesses were built and designed. They were built for obfuscation. They were built for lengthy experiences and totally flipping it on its head. Companies were incented to send everybody through the funnel, not just the good consumers, not the consumers that Citibank wanted or Merrick Bank wanted. They're just like, I'm going to throw everything at the wall and let it sort of shuffle out, which was horrible for consumers, right? And again, it's just a way to redesign things that is harder to think about because it's really easy when you're not at risk. A CPM is I have to show a banner ad. The CPA is I have to send a consumer to a product that they want, And I have to have a partner who wants that consumer. And it's only when that consumer applies and gets approved does Credit Karma get compensated. So pushing down our compensation position in the funnel made us responsible for the quality of those consumers, which was just, not where the internet was and not where financial services advertising was at that point in time. But it allowed us to unlock a whole different set of data, have magical, delightful experiences with our members, and have partners who were astounded at the quality of traffic that we could share with them.
When you first pitched that idea, was it a hard sell? Was it considered a business risk at the time? Or
no, because the beauty is when you start at zero, you got nowhere to go. When you're starting at small numbers, right? You have nowhere to go. And I think we're all super quants. And so you realize, like, if you can control that, if you truly can control that in a smart way, you can help consumers get to products they love. And instead of monetizing on every impression, you're monetizing where they're getting value. You actually tend to have a higher net revenue than advertising on the CPM. And so, like, that efficiency in our business was very, very positive in the end. And it's one of the things that, made us much more successful than some of the other businesses. But the other side in that world was the other businesses got a lot of pressure, right? Like, we're on Credit Karma and they're charging CPA. We want off of this program. We want to hold you responsible. And they would have to change their entire business structure to be comparative to us. And that was just not something that at that point in time that they were structured or prepared to do in any way.
But pretty cool for you.
Totally.
Being the architect of the model that now everyone else having to switch to, that's pretty bold, Nichole. Now, a couple of questions based on just some of the questions that were coming from my Advancing Women in Entrepreneurship students. Is your gender something that you feel has gone before you as an opportunity? Is it something that you feel that has gone before you as an obstacle? Is this revolving door depending on the day and depending on who you're with? If you would just be willing to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, having spent time in Boston as well as the West Coast, very different experiences. So, I did find the East Coast to be much harder to be a female and to also be gay and to be out and comfortably out. The West Coast is much more of a culture of what can you do for me? And I don't care if you're in, shorts and flip-flops. I don't care who you are, but if you can help me, let's get going. So I do think that, at least in, 2000 through 2010, that was my experience, having been in Boston and then spent some time out here. So there has been pros and cons to it. For me, I've definitely had some of the luxury of, and I'll say it's a luxury, but my team has stood beside me and my peers have stood with me of, like, if you're not comfortable with a woman leading the company, if you're not comfortable with an out woman talking about her wife, like, then you don't want to do business. That is no harm, no foul. It is harm, it is foul. But, like, we're okay without you. Right? Yeah. And I think that knowing that we could quickly move to who we wanted to be, and we thought we would be successful with people who believed in us, was the most important thing. There's definitely been times, where people are like, oh, can you, schedule this call for Ken? And I'm like, yeah, I'll ship that off, like misappropriating, like, roles and responsibilities and stuff like that. And, I tend to think very optimistically, like, people make mistakes, people foot fault, things aren't intentional. I think the biggest thing I'd say is, don't let it get in your head. Like, if it's going to be in other people's heads, just move beyond it and don't, you can try to change it, but is that energy worth it versus surrounding yourself with the people that really, want to work with you? It's had pros and cons. I will say, I think the last thing I'll say on this one is just, like, I'm really proud at Credit Karma of our compensation philosophy is that we pay for role. So every role that has the same title gets the same compensation. So we have worked extremely hard to take bias out of any type of compensation challenges at Credit Karma. And I think that there's a lot of smart things that can be done there to create equivalency.
Yeah, was that something that you spearheaded, or was that a passion project on the part of the other leaders of the company of, hey, we see this problem and we see this discrepancy and we just do not want to fall into that trap?
Yeah, so I have an amazingly strong, powerful head of Chief People Officer, Colleen McCreary, who leads our HR, and she's amazing. And she came in with all the passion and ownership. I just feel lucky that I was one of the EC members that was able to, support her in a very non-discussion across the EC. She's like, we have to do this. This is great. This is why. And we're all like, yes, we have to do this. And so, like having other leaders who are female and just even HR oriented come in with such strength and power and put the right things in place, it feels great. But to also have an entire set of the executive committee where it's not a discussion, debate, or conversation. We're all like, yeah, that makes total sense. Let's do that tomorrow, right? How do we get that moving forward?
Yeah, I wish that this framework you've set up, we would see move to other companies in the way that Credit Karma's model has for consumer financial services. What would you recommend to women who, especially women going into male-dominated fields, in terms of sniffing out culture before they accept jobs? What would you say? Because you talked about the role of supportive culture, people, and also two frameworks that help to support you. What would be some recommendations, for a 22-year-old graduate going for her first job? What would be some recommendations for you for her to seek an environment that will help to grow her as a leader?
Yeah, I think you should be challenging and asking the open questions of like, what's it like to be a woman working here?
Yeah.
Right? Like how, there's some great quote, and I'll probably mix it up a little bit, but it's the difference between how's it go? I don't want an invitation to the prom. I want to be asked to dance. And so there's this world where everyone is at the table, but not everyone is participating. And I think when you go through your interviews and when you go through your screenings, you should have a strong set of questions around, I want to make sure I meet female leaders. And if they're not in my zone, whether that's product or marketing or what have you, I want to meet other, female leaders that have been here and even that have seen advancement in this organization. And so I think, having honest conversations with the people that are in those organizations about what it's like to be a woman. And I think those are also questions you can ask of males, like, hey, how do you think about diversity? How do you think about inclusion? How do you move forward? Like, do you guys think about this regularly? Like, is there even a language here around it? There's some places where it's fantastic and other places where, as you've seen in the media, it can be quite toxic. But more often than not, you can find a good place and you can be extremely comfortable and you can be included, you can have a voice, you can be a leader, you can see advancement. You just need to scream for those things up front.
Okay. Well, before I turn it over to Megan for questions, in my research on you, there were some themes that kept coming up in some of the interviews with you. And I think that they just really stood out to me. They made it onto a trusty Post-it. The first one is, and you touched on this in your story of just the ocean and the call of it, and just that spiritual experience, this idea of being happy or doing what you're passionate about. Could you please just talk real briefly more about that and how, people could use that as a guiding role for making their future decisions?
Yeah. So, I think if I would have limited myself out of college of taking my Zoe degree and going pre-med, like, I probably would have made a great doctor, but I probably would not have been happy, right? Like the amount of interaction with people over time, longitudinal relationships versus like day to day, it's really important to me. And I was able to figure that out. But, I think for everyone out there, it's just really around, you can focus on making the most money, you can focus on having the most prestige, and you can focus about being happy. And I think any one of those three are okay, right? But you just have to be authentic about who you are and what really matters. I have a lot of friends that are lawyers. Many of them are happy practicing lawyers, and many of them have divorce law altogether. And many of those people had gone into it for the money or the prestige, and that takes you through your dreaming motion. But the reality of that day in and day out is really hard. And so I just encourage all of you in that, I know that I'm in a very unique situation, and definitely an exception to most rules, but like, I believe, in my heart of hearts, that if you follow what you're passionate about and you're happy, the wealth and prestige will come with it. And that wealth may be different dollar amounts or, different titles, but you'll feel so much more complete. And so just consider your happiness as an equally critical factor as you're thinking about where you go.
Right, as well as those other ones that are often associated more directly with career. You touched on this in your answer. What is the role of transparency and authenticity in what you do?
Yeah, for me, it's just being who you are in every interaction, right? I think people sometimes try to, sneak up on people and be like, well, I'm this, did you know that? And, X, Y, Z. I'm like, just be who you are, move on, move forward from it, live your life, let the world choose who wants to interact with you or not. Don't be anything that you're not, because you're not going to sustain it, and be happy in doing it. Like it's truly a freedom to just be who you are. Like, I'm quirky and giddy and like little crazy concepts sometimes, but like that's who I am, and like that's cool, right? Like, I'm super comfortable with that. And if people don't love it, that's cool. There's a gazillion other people out there for them to go be friends with or for them to go work with. But just be you. Don't try to be things that you're not, because it's so short-lived. And the long game is just feeling comfortable in your own skin.
Right. And then the last one is doing well by doing good. I sometimes think that we fall into a trap that is an either or decision, but you are saying, no, you can do both. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I think this actually goes back a lot to like the way those early businesses constructed their businesses. They were doing well by being bad. And whether I love the people at Experian and I pick on them a lot, and we've built relationships over the years around their jingles and their free credit scores. But they would say that while we were in rooms, 4-4 above a bar, no air conditioning, while we were in that room trying to figure out how to make credit scores free for everyone, they were in rooms trying to figure out how to make it harder to cancel their free credit score trials. And I'm just so proud that, like, by doing things the right way, by not just making it available to people who have certain amounts of money that can pay these recurring bills, but democratizing and driving accessibility, showed how much more powerful it can be. And that's what we will continue to focus on. And I think I just think there's a greater good in doing that, and I think that it leads to much more success.
Yes, and that was also part of that opportunity. It doesn't have to be that way, and you saw a different way that it could go, and you won that game by both quantitative and qualitative metrics. I'm going to turn it over to Megan now, who has been taking in student questions, and there's also alumni on the line too, and they might be having some questions. So I'm very interested to hear what the people who have been watching have to ask you now.
Awesome.
Okay, the most popular question is about zoology to Credit Karma. When did you know that following your zoology major was not the right path for you?
Well, I don't know that not following my zoology path was not the right thing for me, but not remaining. So that's a good question. I'm just trying to figure out how to answer this. So when I graduated from college, I had applied to several physical therapy schools, and I had gotten into some of them. And my senior year, every 3 or 4 day weekend, I flew somewhere in the US. And ironically, there was no physical therapy school that I applied for that took me in Los Angeles. And so for me, that was kind of the sign that I wasn't going to go do that. And so the steps for me was, finding a place to get a job, which essentially took me into food. Like, it took me into Pizza Hut. and into management training, and then into a manager, and then running a larger set of Pizza Huts in Southern California, but quickly realizing that I had already moved out of zoology without having decided to move out of zoology, right? And so it was never a conscious decision that I wasn't going to follow my pre-med, studies. It was more of a decision that I was going to follow how I would be happy and what I thought would be more fulfilling long-term for me. I know it's super cheesy when I hear myself say it, but it's actually true.
No, I think it's great. This is a cute one. Has coming from a small town in Ohio affected how you use your imagination to innovate? This student is from a town really close to where you're from, and you have inspired her.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I think that, there's dreamers, right? And I think they can come from small towns. They can come from big towns. I spent a lot of time dreaming. I was a lifeguard for many years. And it's a lot of hours, definitely checking the pool, keeping kids safe, but also just kind of dreaming about how things could be different or would be different, or what if I were queen for a day, and what rules would I create if I were in charge of the list of 10? And I just am kind of that curious person. So I do think dreamers can come from anywhere. Innovators, imagination. I had an imaginary friend. I don't think I've ever said this in an interview. I had 2 imaginary friends when I was young. So I've always kind of grown up that way. I don't think you have to be from a small town, but you sure can be.
Okay. Can you share a time when you failed in your entrepreneurial journey and what lessons you learned from that?
I fail all the time. I still fail every stinking day. You have to fail, and you should embrace failure, because failure is learning, right? Let's see, what did I fail at today? Let me think of a good one. I'm fighting for headcount today, and I'm failing miserably on how to get it out of the model. I'll tell you that. Finding someone to share. So that's actually a great example. I'm working to get headcount for our data partnerships team, and the model that we've developed is very, very tight. And so we're working across different, I think of it a little bit as Catan, right? You're building, you're sort of trading, you're creating net new. And, I'm trying to work a deal with someone internally to figure out how to get more resources. And in that, right now I'm just failing. And what that means is that there'll be some data partnerships at Credit Karma that we won't be able to support. How else have I failed? I mean, God, over 13 years, whether it was the FTC blemish of us, having had a vulnerability in our code, whether it was, relationships at time that have gone rough and even turned off. Those are all failures. I mean, I think you just to me, a failure is such a common daily thing. They're big and they're small, but you move forward and you learn from it. So I guess I should come up with a list of Nichole's 50 top failures. I should reflect on that. I think that there's probably so many, I don't know which ones to share.
All right. The next question is, similar to Credit Karma, the investing app Robinhood's idea of commission-free trading made competitors rethink how they do business. When other businesses catch up, how do you stay ahead of the curve?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I love the Robinhood app. They're scaling pretty fast, which means that they're having some vulnerabilities either on the security side or on the reliability side. How do you stay ahead? I think you have to continue recreating who you are. I think one of the best companies that's done that is probably, I think Reid Hoffman just came out with a really great podcast about reinventing the business. And if you think about Netflix moved from shipping DVDs from Blockbuster, going to a store, to shipping DVDs. And then as they did it, they moved from DVDs to streaming. And then they reinvented a third time from streaming to original content. And so they are, in my mind, one of the best reinventors of what the business can do. And if you think about those 3 jumps, they're all jumps that have been enabled by different technology, infrastructure, scale, AWS, Google Cloud, that has enabled them to do these things. And at the same time, as they've moved and taken money from CBS or from Disney or things like that, they've been able to create their own content when they have millions of users looking at it, that it's worth creating your own content. And that's that reimagination of, now that I have these resources, what can I now go do differently? That's phenomenal, right? And so, like, yeah, you got to reinvent yourself. It's not okay to just optimize yourself. If you optimize yourself, your S curve at your plateau, you have to have 1,000 additional S's that you're seeding, growing, and cultivating on a regular basis.
The next question. So you're in the process of being acquired by Intuit. Do you feel you'll be able to keep the environment that you are so proud of, that has made you so successful, after that acquisition is complete?
Yeah, I do. So the thing about Intuit is that they're very aligned on the culture of caring about consumers, caring about their partners, and caring about their employees. And so from a cultural perspective, I'm very, very excited. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of things that we're going to be able to do to, one, learn from operating a company at scale, but two, also, I think there's some DNA that we'll bring to their organization that they will learn from, and I think together we'll be a better organization.
Just a reminder to our students, if you want to go ahead and submit your student attendance now via the Ask a Question button. The next question is, what is the favorite part of your job?
Let's see. You know, I love spending time with my team. I really, really like when we're, like, right now we're in annual operating planning. And so we're getting to brainstorm and dream about next year and really talk about how we're going to stretch and where we're going to optimize versus where we're going to innovate. And I have to say, like, those times with the team and then the happy hours and getting to know those people, that to me is the most precious. You know, the partners are awesome. I love hanging out with them, fancy dining, flying, all kinds of Vegas stuff. But, you know, when you're with your team, like, it's just like being home. It's for me, it's truly an extension of family.
These questions are kind of all over the place, so I apologize for that. How do credit agencies change policies or consider more leniency during times of economic hardship, like the Great Recession or COVID-19?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's not the credit agencies, right? It's not the TransUnions or the Experians or Equifaxes of the world. It's really the financial institutions. So whether that's Chase or Amex or Bank of America. And, you know, I think this is where we all have to have a lot of empathy, in that it's incredibly tough times for consumers, but it's also very, very risky. And the tough and the challenging moment for a consumer is also a very risky moment for the Chases or the Bank of America or whichever FIs. And so they need to make sure that their portfolios are long-term profitable, that they hit, you know, the tension requirements from, you know, the government and or the stress test, and that they can actually maintain a business to keep lending to people. And so, you know, it's a little bit of little steps one after another, but you know, I think it's very hard to be on either side of that, and I'm empathetic to both sides in today's type of challenging environment.
What advice do you have for your 20-year-old self?
Oh, you know, I'd have one piece of advice. Wait a little bit longer before having the first kid so I get to travel a little bit more. That's my number one advice. I sometimes, you guys are going to giggle on this one, I sometimes go back and forth between telling my kids to get married when they're 20 so that when they're 40, all of their kids will be out of the house and that they can nap. And other times I tell them to wait really long until they get married to make sure they've gotten all of their travel out. And, you know that they're going to be hanging with their kids at home. And, like, just to be honest, like, I travel internationally with our kids at least twice a year, and we travel a lot domestically. But traveling with your 4 little kids is different than traveling with just your wife. So, you know, I go back and forth, and sometimes my wife thinks I'm crazy on this one because she's like, do not tell the kids to, like, get married and have their first baby by the time they're 20. You're crazy. And then other times she's like, well, maybe you're right because we never get to take a nap. I'm like, exactly, right? So either side of it, I don't know. But just realize that's the 2 choices you have and pick the one that's best for you.
Last question before I hand it back over to Beth for closing remarks. What did you do in your college years to prepare you for the real world?
Yeah, the real world's not so scary. Yeah, the real world is it's actually a lot like college. It's making friends, it's building relationships. Probably the biggest thing I did at college to prepare me for the real world is figured out how to get up before 10 a.m. I was a double digit wake up person in college, so that was definitely a struggle when I hit the real world. But it's not as big, it's not as bad, and it's not as scary. In the world of like progress over perfection, just get started in the real world. You're all going to do great. You're at an amazing college. You're getting a great education. And if you got into Miami, you've got a great head on your shoulders. You're going to do fine. Believe in yourself and just go be you.
All right. Thank you. Beth?
Are there some opportunities that you wish you would have taken advantage of at your time at Miami? I know for me, when I was a student here, I never talked to my professors ever. And now I'm just this annoying, desperate parrot of a professor that I'm like, come to office hours. How come no one came to office hours today? I think I'm really just kind of speaking to my 18-year-old self, just wanting to grab her by the shoulders saying, hey, that relationship building, it starts right now between students and professors. So I think about that quite a bit, but just thinking from your perspective right now and talking about the relational building and all of this education affords you, even if it doesn't directly correlate to what you go on to do career-wise, it still plays out. What would you recommend to our students who are watching this, who have anywhere from 1 year to 4 years to go here in terms of how to take advantage of what this university offers?
Yeah, I think that it's applicable whether it's 1 or 4 years. I look back and I had a lot of great relationships through high school and amazing relationships through much of college. But it's really hard as you move from one chapter of your life to the next chapter to keep those relationships. And if I had one thing that I go back and do again is I would have invested more time. I would have made time for more conversations to keep more of those relationships strong and deeply connected. That's one area like I look back and don't feel like I fed those enough. And those relationships still have a very deep and meaningful place in my heart, but those people are no longer with me. And so sometimes I'm that person out there stalking past friends, trying to find out what their phone number is, because I will call them if I find them. Oh my God, it's been 20 years. I miss you. I so miss you.
You just don't remember me, but I remember you.
Right. Because I do think it matters. And like in the world of like, the world that we live in with so many digital interactions, like having real people to have real conversations with that you've lived through experiences together, that's so powerful. And I just finding that group, whether it's 5 or 10 people that you keep close and you keep deep, I just think that's definitely one thing I go back and do all over again in a very different way.
Well, Nichole, thank you for taking the time to meet with all of us, to share your journey so openly, to talk about what it looks like to translate major into career, to translate one geographical experience into another, and truly what it looks like to use that imagination to see a problem in the marketplace and then to scale it in a way that Credit Karma has. So I appreciate you sharing your time with us, your story with us, your expertise with us. And I don't know what you're doing with the rest of your day, but you've definitely made mine with all of your sharings. Thank you so much.
Well, really appreciate it, Beth. And, such a fan of Miami University and so excited for all of your students and their bright futures. And I always tell everyone, I'm always here. So, hit me on LinkedIn, hit me on email. I'm always happy to help. Mark, who's doing Oros up in Portland, I got to know him at an event over in Portugal. He's another entrepreneur from Miami. And so like we do find each other when you get out on the other side in the real world. We bump into each other and we're inspired by one another and, just stay connected and get connected. Awesome. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.